Well, hey, everybody. Welcome to the Worship Circle podcast. I'm Todd, and this is Kristene. And Kristene, you're in California. It's a long way, but thanks to the miracle of the internet, we can connect. So thanks for jumping in today.
Of course.
Everybody, Kristene is going to be jumping in to lead small group for Worship Circle in this next term, and we're so excited to have her. And God just orchestrates things for all of us in our lives. And at this leg of the journey, through Kristene's friend Kalley and Rita Springer, we've all gotten connect. So welcome, Kristene, and we are so grateful that you're going to be leading with us this term.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm really excited about doing that. I love connecting with other worship leaders, and because God's done a lot with me in that area, and I feel like there's a special place in my heart for people that lead other people in worship.
Well, let's talk. I mean, I feel like in every interview they go back because you never know what someone's heard about someone. But let's talk about your journey starting in kind of Niagara Falls, growing up in there, and kind of the start of your spiritual journey, but also musically. How did that all culminate together when you were younger?
And that's a great question. I have very vivid long-term memories. My husband always makes fun of me. I have... I think my earliest memory of worship was I was in a church in North Tonawanda area called Triple C. It was like Community Christian Church, and I remember being small. I was probably 5 years old, and there was this worship leader, and she had the bright, fiery red hair, and she would be up on stage leading. And I knew as even a 5-year-old that that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to lead worship. I wanted to sing. And so at home, I would pull this, we had this little stool, and I would stand on the little stool and I'd spelt out my song, and I'd use anything and everything for a microphone. And my parents actually ended up buying me like one of those little microphones that was attached to a little cassette player back in the day.
Yeah.
And I wanted to sing so bad, so they would sign me up for all these church plays and Christmas plays and stuff, but I hated speaking in public. And so I would be the one little kid that could actually hold a tune, but I wouldn't talk. So they would have to find special parts for the play where I could just pop out of the choir and sing a solo. And then
That's awesome.
I was unafraid to sing as a kid, even though I was afraid to speak in public. So over the course of growing up, I kind of stopped singing because I was self-conscious, all that kind of stuff. But I remember being about 15 years old, and there was a new worship leader that came into our church in Niagara Falls. We are at a church called Destiny Christian Church, and this worship leader named Joe Miller comes in, and he has his own band, and he's super cool, and I'm excited. I want to be a part. And he has me playing keys. And, when you're a part of a smaller church, as I'm sure a lot of people can relate, it's like, you better be prepared for whatever needs to be done, And I remember one Sunday, this worship leader just didn't show. One of our girl worship leaders didn't come. And Joe is like, "You're singing, I guess, today." And I'm like, "But I don't sing. I play the piano." I'm 15, and this is terrifying for a 15-year-old, but he's like, "You sing." And he just hooks up a mic in front of me, and I sang. And I knew that this is what I love to do. This is what I wanted to do. And I just kind of let it be taken and stolen for whatever reason. And from that point on, people just poured out encouragement for me.
That's good.
I knew that if I didn't get encouragement that day after I put myself out there, I would have just shut down. I think it's so important for young worship leaders to get that encouragement.
Yeah.
And so I kept singing. I started writing music when I was 16. I heard Jason Upton for the first time. A church in Orchard Park, New York. And I was in the back. And I think up until that point, worship music just felt so lofty and out of reach, or, it just felt really beyond me.
Right.
And when he started singing his song, Gideon, like, I don't have the power, I don't even have a clue. Start singing that song. I'm like, pretty sure I wrote stuff like that down in my journal,
Yeah.
And I thought maybe this isn't as hard as I made it out to be. And that day I went home and I wrote my first song. And I was so excited about it. I showed it to my worship leader, Joe, and he's like, let's make some tweaks and let's lead it on Sunday. And I'm like, really? And he was just so encouraging. He's like, yeah, let's lead it. So we led it that Sunday at church. I think we led it a couple more times. And I just felt so empowered and encouraged to keep going and just keep writing. And some of them were bad, some were so bad, but I just kept going. And after high school, I ended up at IHOP Kansas City. I went out there, made worship teams out there for singing, and that's where God grew my spontaneous worship. And so that's my early, that's like Kristene before she turns 20.
Yeah.
My early worship leader days, but that's where God had me then.
Where did you sense that God was with you, that his presence was with you? Or there's some times in those early years, Kristene, where you're like, hey, I see that you see me,
Good question, Todd. I have a very vivid memory when I was 10. This was probably after I kind of put singing on the shelf as a little 10-year-old. Sounds so funny saying, but I remember being in my bedroom and feeling the presence of God for the first time. And I grew up in the church. Since I was 3, and I said the sinner's prayer over and over again. Yeah. But this was the very first time I remember knowing that he was there with me. And I just started, as a 10-year-old, I just started talking. Mm-hmm. And it felt so funny because it felt like he was just there wanting to listen to a 10-year-old. Yeah. And I said, I remember the content of what I was saying being, I really want to be your friend. Can you teach me how to be your friend? And I could get choked up thinking about it. But I just knew it was probably a half-hour conversation with me dominating most of it. And I just remember walking away from that time in my life and that moment, knowing that he had heard me and that he was going to make me his friend. And so over the course of that time, there was another specific moment when I was about 15. My parents were playing Hillsong and Darlene Check's song, Potter's Hands. Remember that song? Mm-hmm. Started playing, and it gripped me as a 15-year-old that I would just say this to the Lord, to say, take me, mold me, use me, fill me. I give my life to the Potter's hands. And it had that same feeling to it as when I was 10, of that, even though I dominated most of that conversation, he heard me and took me seriously. Yeah. And so those are probably the most significant moments with the Lord. And I think it's so awesome that even as a kid, and a very just punk kid, that talked back to her parents, gave that he would listen to a kid. He would take what they say seriously and set them up for, where I was going. He set me up for where I was going. He took my prayers seriously then. Yeah.
So how long were you at IHOP in Kansas City?
I went to IHOP. I did the Fire in the Night internship, which is it's a 3-month internship, but I didn't have enough, prayer. So I went back for another 3 months. So I spent a total of 6 months at IHOP Kansas City, being on worship teams and learning how to, when you spontaneously sing at IHOP, it's not like, whenever you want to sing. It's like, it's kind of like, if you don't sing, nobody will pray. Yeah. And so I learned kind of on the fly, like, if somebody's praying Ephesians 1:17, give to us a spirit of wisdom and revelation, you better be ready with like something to sing. So sometimes it was just, give to us the spirit of wisdom, revelation, and you just sing out the verse and what you were, what they were praying about, or worship with the word. And I learned to sing the Bible there, and I learned endurance there, because we were in the prayer room from 12 at night to 6 a.m. and the next morning. So 12 p.m. to 6 a.m. was our set. And I think at that point, I had only spent time with God maybe 30 minutes a day. And I thought, and I'm like on fire,
Yeah.
I'm the spiritual one at my church. And this was a whole different thing of, I give my time to the Lord. I give legitimately my life to him.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was there for 6 months.
And then what happened after that?
Well, I think long story short, I came home for a little bit. I worked at the Niagara Falls Public Library, begged God for an adventure. I remember just like basically ice skating to work. If you've ever been to upstate New York.
I was going to ask you what it was like to grow up in Niagara Falls, just weather-wise, because I was there this past fall and it was cold.
It is. It can be like a 5-month winter. Maybe sometimes it would creep into May and you'd be like, why? But I have vivid memories of going to work early in the morning to the downtown Niagara Falls Library, and it had snowed and the plows hadn't plowed the side streets yet, and that's how I got to work. I went to the side streets. And so we have this thing, like basically in Western New York, if it's icy, if you can't stop before a stop sign, you just kind of lean on the horn. Yeah. So anybody would know you're coming. You're like, as you just skate on through.
Unbelievable.
Yeah. So that's basically in a nutshell. And then I was home for 9 months, and then I heard of a man called Lou Engle. I just came across his teaching at IHOP, because I've been following IHOP still, and something just started just burning in my chest. Like I have to be wherever this man is. I have to pray with this guy.
Yeah.
And because his faith level, the faith for changing history through prayer and fasting, really, really struck a chord with me, that I could partner with God. And it really came back to that friendship thing when I was 10. And it's like, I want to partner with God. I want to see significant change. And I ended up in Washington, D.C. And I helped establish a house of prayer there with him. And then in September of 2005, he sent out a team with I think I was one of the oldest ones on the team. I was 21. Sent out a team to San Francisco, and that's how I ended up living in San Francisco for 3 years.
Yes.
And that time in my life is like a whole chunk of story right there, but that's what I was doing.
Yeah, for those of you who haven't, I was actually researching for this interview yesterday and watched the short story that you have about living there. And my wife Carrie and I lived there for a year, and we precious friends there at a church called Epic Church. But it's easy it's a crazy place. It's beautiful, but there's lots of brokenness. And just continuing on that journey and idea that we're talking about of God is with you. What are some of the ways, you've moved to San Francisco, you're young, this is a big, crazy city. Just what are some of the ways for those listening that, again, you sense God's presence with you in the midst of being in that just overwhelming new place? Because it's literally like going to the mission field. It is.
No, it is. And when I talk about that time in my life, I will always say this is where I saw the kingdom of heaven the brightest, and I felt the presence of God the strongest. And I don't know how else to really describe it except that I put myself in a position of deep need for him to come and to show up. And also, like, when you light a candle in a dark room, you see it immediately, and you see its effects so they're like, whoa, it lights it up so brightly. And sometimes in a bright room, when you light a candle, you barely know it's on. And so when I was in San Francisco, it felt like the dark room. And so
Mm.
wherever there was a spark of the kingdom of heaven, it was so vivid and bright, and it cast, ripple effects on the walls. You just saw it everywhere. And it was necessary to see it. And I will tell people stories of that time in my life, and they'll be like, "What?" I remember coming to Reading and to Bethel and sharing stories as if this is just what happens all the time, and they'd be like,
Yeah.
"This is not what happens all the time." Um, and it was probably the most difficult season of my life, partially because I dealt really, really intensely with panic attacks and fear. Kind of all stemmed from this starting to actually question my faith.
Mm-hmm.
So this is me as a 21-year-old, 22-year-old, 23-year-old, and I have grown up in the church, and I have had significant encounters with God. And then I find myself in this really dark place, like seeing dark stuff. And at first just starting to question, like, what am I doing with my life? I could be anywhere but this stinky place. Like, and I should have gone to college. Like, what's going on? I think all that stuff ran through my head when I'm living in a 9-bedroom weird flat above Rockin' Java next to Amoeba Records, and it smells really bad, and there's drug deals going on in the back, and there's like people are shoving crystals in my mailbox, and the club across the street's like all night. And
Yep.
I'm like, I could be anywhere but here. And there was a significant memory. I remember sitting on Treasure Island. Do you remember Treasure Island? There was a house of prayer there when I was there.
No way.
It had a really long acronym, like SF HOP FAN. It was like San Francisco House of Prayer for All Nations, and it was just this whole thing. And I was there. I had just finished leading my set, and I walked down to it's like where the rocks are. It's an incredible view of San Francisco, and I just was crying and saying, I do not want to be here, God. And I felt the presence of the Lord in that moment, and him say, but can you sit here with me? Can you feel this with me?
Yeah.
And I knew in that moment, it was like that same invitation as a 10-year-old, me chapping away, like, make me your friend, God.
Yeah.
And I realized that, like, friends aren't always there just for the good stuff. Friends are there for the hard stuff, right? Like, good friends are there for the parts of our hearts that are broken, and the parts of our hearts that are sad. And I knew that was kind of this invitation to friendship, deep friendship with him, that this was a place where his heart was sad, his heart was heavy. It's funny because Jesus is obviously never without hope, but the fact that he can feel deep emotion is amazing. So that kind of changed my perspective on the city, and I determined in my heart that I'm here, and in order to kind of stave off the panic, and I started running, and I started climbing Twin Peaks like every day just to get that, and I mean, in general, in a scientific aspect of adrenaline, extra adrenaline through your body, I was doing the right thing. I was working out, and I would just meet with the Lord on top of Twin Peaks every day. And just a lot of times it was foggy and I couldn't see the city, and it was just kind of swirling around me. And I had a really terrible MP3 player that I bought because I couldn't afford an iPod. I remember I could only hold 10 songs in it or something. And the one song that I kept listening to over and over again was actually Avalon, There Are No Orphans. God can use anything.
Yeah.
And so I would blast that song on top of Twin Peaks. Listen, and it would be, who here among us has not been broken? Who here among us? But there are no orphans. There are no strangers. There are no outcasts. And it was it was a promise to me, but I felt like it was a promise to the city too, of there are no orphans of God. So many fallen, but hallelujah, there are no orphans of God. It's a pretty powerful song. It has a whole modulation and everything in it.
Yeah.
And God really taught me to be his friend there. Really, really taught me that sometimes, like, the price you pay for being awake in the Garden of Gethsemane is worth it. It's worth it to just to be his friend. So that's a pretty good sum of my time there. But he definitely didn't leave me without signposts when I felt like I couldn't handle it anymore. He always had. I'll give you an example. It was like I made a marker of every day that I climbed up Twin Peaks, and I'm like, okay, day 30, and I got to the spiritual 40, and but I remember waking up this one day just from a dream about a grand piano, like God delivering a grand piano to my door, and this delivery man just would not go away. And we're on a walk-up flat. There's no way you could you'd have to open the roof and then lower it in. You couldn't with a crane. There's no way you could get a grand piano in there. And this is deliveries at my door in my dream. And I'm like, send it back. This cannot be here. And they're like, we have a delivery for Kristene. Like, that can't be in here. That can't get in here. And in my dream, I felt the Holy Spirit say, well, then you need to get a bigger house because this is not going away. So I wake up that morning, I put on my shoes, I walk up Twin Peaks, and it's the 26th day of me doing that. And as I'm kind of coming around the curve where you leave all the neighborhoods, you leave all the houses, and you start to see the city, this black car comes down the curve, and its license plate is Grand 26. And it probably wouldn't have made any sense to anybody else in that moment, but it made sense to me. It was jarring. And if I would have had a phone back in 2006, I would have taken a picture. But it was little things like that where God just made it very clear that he was aware, and that he was like, I gave you that dream, and you do need a bigger house. You need to believe that you are as important as you hope you are, and that I am as close as you think I am. And so I say that all the time because I think that's probably the struggle of a lifetime, is believing that you're as important as you hope you are, and that he's as close as you think he is, and not doubting that.
Yeah.
So long-winded version there, Todd, but.
No, I just love, I remember when I was listening to the YouTube video and the Grand 26 thing, and I wanted to bring that back up, and I'm glad you shared about it, because I think for most of our life, it's like you're going back to 10-year-old Kristene and going, Lord, are you still with me? Was that really you? And it's not that we're always looking for signs and wonders, but he uses the most mundane but special, intimate, unique things to our souls along the journey to go, hey, I see you today. You matter. And then you're like, was that really you? And you're like, you can't make this stuff up, So when you share that, it's just so encouraging. Was there a point, we'll move from San Francisco, but having lived there, was there a point, like, was it 6 months, 7 months, 8 months, where you're like, if I pull the ripcord now, I'll be okay? And then you had that moment where you decided to stay. What was the time frame on that like for you?
It was about, when it got good.
Yeah.
I would say I was struggling for about a year and a half, like pretty hard. And it wasn't, and I actually had that moment. The moment where I decided to stay was right in the middle of that. Like, it wasn't like I decided to stay and I said yes to God, and then he's like, okay, we'll part the clouds and the sun will stream. And, it felt like I said yes in the middle of like a cloud, just said yes to him, no, it felt really good to be confident that that's where he wanted me, because I knew that he would take care of me. But it still was pretty hard for about almost a year after that. And
Yeah.
just struggling, but not feeling abandoned. So I'd say I think it was summer, it would have been summer 2007, where there was a significant shift for me.
Mm.
Where, because I was cleaning a guy's house for income in the city.
Yeah.
And I remember I was waiting for laundry to be done and just sitting on his porch with tea and looking at, I don't know exactly how to explain it, but everything was so vivid. And the only thing I have reference for would be when Jesus is talking to Nicodemus and he's saying, "You must be born again to enter the kingdom of heaven."
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, "How can I be born? How can I, do that?" And I was just sitting on the balcony, and it felt like every bird was so loud and every tree was just bright green, and it was as if I had never seen these things before in my life. And I remember thinking, either the whole Bible is real or I need pills. Like, I just like, there was no in between.
Yeah.
God had brought me to this place where there was no plan B. It was either the whole Bible is real and reality and creation is real, and I'm a
Yeah.
planet floating in outer space and he is the king, like, or give me some pills because
Yeah.
I'm going crazy. And it was a beautiful, terrifying time, but it kind of shifted everything
Yeah.
for me, and he became incredibly vivid and real
Wow.
in that time there.
My wife Carrie, when we were living there, had a hummingbird a couple times in the backyard in West Portal that would just come and just stay like a foot away from her. She'd be like, "Lord, is this you?" It was like we were just, you're just looking for like, "Lord, do you see me? Are you with me in the midst of this season?" What was going on for you, Kristene, musically during this time in San Francisco? Is this prior to your kind of early records that you had started making? How did you go from that to the next, season musically and with where God was leading?
I was so my first album, Those Who Dream, hadn't come out yet. That came out in 2008, but I had written a lot of those songs during this really difficult period of time, especially it's called Praise the Lord. And it basically says, like, "I will not die, I will live, and I'll tell of the works of the Lord," and based on that verse in the Psalms. And I just had to declare it over myself: "You're not going to die, you're going to live, and not only that, you're going to tell of the works of the Lord." And so the summer 2007, I was getting better. I was just about to run a half marathon because I had been just running, and it was the night before the race. And so I'm at our flat by Amoeba Records, and I'm pounding pasta. And not just like good pasta. It's like plain, just boiled. And I'm just eating pasta because that's what you do. And I get this phone call from the church we were connected to in San Francisco. And they're like, "We just had a worship leader get really sick, and we really need a worship leader right now."
Mm-hmm.
I knew it was a conference that was going on that Luingo was actually putting on. And so I was like, okay, I kind of had this moment of, do I say yes? Like, I'm pounding pasta. And so I said yes, and I hopped on a bus. I got off the bus on Market Street, and that church was right on Market Street. Got on there, did a quick sound check, and just led worship. And I led some of the songs that I had written. So I led like Praise the Lord, the one I was talking about. I led this one, Psalm 126. We were like those who dream. I led that one. And after the set, this man comes up to me and he's like, "Hey, I'm Banning Leapshire. I just was wondering, like, are those your songs?" And I said, "Yeah, those are my songs." He's like, "Well, I'm starting a record label, I know you don't know who I am, but I'm starting this worship record label up in Reading, and
No
I would
way.
love it if we could demo out some of those songs if you're interested. And I was like, well, yeah, I have a little bit of money. And I had like $1,000 saved for someday, like I would make an album.
Yeah.
Obviously had no idea how much an album costs, but he uh so that's how I got connected to Banning Leapshire. He gave
No
me his
way.
phone number and he said, just call me when you're ready to make a demo. And a week later, I called him and said, hey, I'd love to come up, recorded a demo, and then the rest is kind of history, I guess. I moved up there in summer 2008 to record and stayed. I stayed
Unbelievable.
for the BSSM and met my husband and never left.
No. So was Banning just visiting?
He was
Uh,
speaking at the conference.
okay, at the conference.
I didn't know who he was, so
Yeah.
it's just crazy how I remember that moment stuffing pasta in my face and being like, I don't have to do
Unbelievable.
this. I don't have to
Yeah.
say yes right now because everybody knows I'm running a half marathon tomorrow. and
Oh man.
and then just saying yes in my life literally shifting.
So what year would that have been? 2008?
That was 2007.
Okay.
It would have been July 2007 because I ran the marathon in July.
So were Kim and Chris and everybody at Jesus Culture at that point, or was that later?
They were there. They had just released, like Kim had just done that one YouTube video of like He Loves Us. And
Yeah.
that's what kind of like blew up and everybody started seeing who Jesus Culture was. That had just
Yeah.
happened. And they were finished recording her album, Here Is My Song, when I met Banning.
Unbelievable. That's crazy. So how did you and Jordan meet?
This is a great question too. He's funny because he's a pastor. And so he's somewhat like doesn't like the story because he feels like it empowers people to do stupid things. But I'll tell it my version because it's awesome.
Yeah.
I was doing first year at BSSM and he was in second year. But I have a vivid memory of good long-term memory. I have a vivid memory of going to my first Friday night service at Bethel and watching this guy walk up the aisle. This would have been 2008. Watching this guy walk up the aisle, and I'm like, man, they have some good-looking guys here. And didn't think anything of it. And then I was in Starbucks with my very best friend Melissa, and who I met in San Francisco at her dad's church, and we moved up there together in Starbucks. And this guy comes up to Melissa and just says, hey, can I have a word for your friend? Can I just give her a word? And she's like, sure. So this guy comes over to me and he's like, hey, I have a word for you. When you walked in, I saw this umbrella over your head. I knew it was prayer, like a golden umbrella of prayer over your head. And I feel like God just wants you to know that your husband is praying for you. And I remember being like, wow, thanks so much. Like I was dating somebody else at the time. And
Yeah.
I'm like, well, thank you. That's like a really good word. And it was Jordan that gave me that word. But
No way.
this was a year before we started dating, maybe even more. So I went on my way and didn't even think anything of it until a year later. He helped us move out of our apartment, and he became a good friend and started pursuing me. And we started dating that November 2009. And he's like, when we started dating, he's like, do you remember the first time we met? And I'm like, honestly, I don't know. I don't remember the first time we ever met because I knew he had been around. And he's like, okay, well, we'll talk about that later. And I just thought it was, when I remembered, I thought it was the most cool thing in the world that
Yeah.
was our first interaction, was him seeing his own prayers over my head.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So then we started dating November 2009 and got married June 2010. And we've been
And
married
then
for 12 years almost.
12 years, 2 kids,
2 kids, yeah.
their names.
There's Lorelai, who's 10 years old,
Okay.
Nicodemus, and
Wow.
he just turned 6.
Wow. That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Um, Talk a little bit about your role. There's a couple things I want to talk about. One is, I know you paint. Like, how did you get into that? When did that start? And then I also want us to touch on kind of ministry life for you at Bethel, what you do now. And then I know you have a new project coming out, so I want to hit that too. But let's start with the painting.
Okay.
Is that something you were doing back in the day in Niagara Falls, or is that more recent?
No, I've loved art since as long as I can remember, and I was more of a pencil drawer in like grade school and through middle school. I had this book on shading, and people
Mm-hmm.
just thought that it was amazing. So when I would draw like a ball and I'd shade it to look like a sphere, like give it
Yeah.
dimension. And so all my like fifth grade friends were like, "Oh my God," that was, oh. And I think to be honest, the reaction that they had to just like, to me, something that I loved, I'm like, well, then I'm gonna do more. And I
Mm.
pursued. So I always say, like, I won most artistic in fifth grade, in eighth grade, and in 12th grade. Superlative, yeah. Um, but I had this one teacher in 10th grade convince me to branch out beyond the pencil. And
Mm-hmm.
I remember him hanging up he stretched a huge canvas for me, basically gave me his entire classroom for a day and a bucket, like buckets of acrylic paint, and just said, you just paint whatever you want to paint.
Mm.
And you should put on music and just, take some time and do this. I'm like, okay. And I remember looking at the canvas, it's huge, just severely intimidating. This is
Mm-hmm.
so intimidating. I don't know what to do. And I put on Delirious. I put on Delirious, the Obsession, the one with Obsession on it.
Mm-hmm.
And I chose orange. Out of all the colors I could have chose, I'm like, orange would be great. And it wasn't a good painting, but it's something inside of me knew that this is where I'm headed. This is what I want to do. I want to paint. I want to express myself this way. And so for my 11th grade and my 12th grade year, I got really, really used to using acrylics and
Mm-hmm.
developing in acrylics. I was going to go to school for art, and I had all these big plans to be like some graphic designer. And I started realizing that I have to work with computers and math, and so it just kind of sucked the life out of it. And then I obviously went to IHOP, and we all know the story, but it's just
Yeah.
sat dormant in me for a really long time. And then 2020 hit,
Yeah.
and I sat down with a little tiny 4x6 canvas, like this big, and started painting.
Mm.
Painting just landscapes and places I wish I would be able to go.
Wow.
Ireland. We missed Ireland that year and painted a
Mm.
bunch. And I think I posted it, and people were like, "Are you selling these?" And I thought, maybe I am. And so I opened like an Etsy store,
No way.
and I've been doing it since, I think, May 2020 was when I had my first sale. Now I've sold, I think I've made about 300 of some sales now, and I very much enjoy it.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to stop. I feel I feel like that's a big part of me too.
It's part of you being that kid,
Yeah, it is.
you know? Um, it's funny. I was going to say, when you're talking, it reminded me, most people don't know who Dan Fogelberg is as I talk, but he was a singer songwriter, but Dan was an artist. and like an art major in college, and then ended up doing music. So you never know what God's gonna
Yeah.
bring back around that He gives you and entrusts to you. What do things look like for you right now, just at Bethel? What's your role there? What do you do on a day to day, kind of week to week basis?
I'd say my role is decently minimal right now.
Yeah,
I'm a worship leader, also obviously with Bethel Music, but and I'm currently volunteering at the BSSM, just taking care of one worship team.
yeah,
I was the worship pastor there for about 5, 6 years,
yeah,
and then Kalley took over for another 6 years. And when she left, I just was like, if you need any help, like,
yeah.
so I'm helping with that, but I'm not going to be doing it next year. I have a heart to definitely grow people in confidence.
Yeah,
That's really big. And when there's nothing like seeing like just a worship leader that just does not believe in what's on their life, and then being just all of a sudden something clicking, and they unapologetically give glory to God. That for me is incredible to watch, and I've gotten to watch that this year with a couple leaders. There's this one girl I was talking to, and she's like, I feel like I hold back because I'm worried that I'm going to be prideful. And I'm like, but I was like, but your heart is to give God glory, to make Him known. Because that's how she always would talk. I'm like, your heart is to make Him known, right? She's like, yeah. I'm like, well, then go do that. Go make Him known,
yeah,
And just seeing like little conversations like that shift somebody's entire thought process. Like, yeah, my heart is to make Him known, and I'm not going to question my heart anymore. And I'm going to go and I'm going to make Him known, and I'm not going to apologize for making Him known. And I love doing that. I think that's what I hope to like do during worship circle too, is just be able to encourage people to do that.
Yeah. Well, thank you for your yes to help. And for those of you listening, Kristene is leading a small group next term, and you can still apply because there's a waiting list for next term. But I was just going to say, Kristene, on your journey, it's like God's just been preparing you, and He was all through your early years and then early 20s, and just the mission-minded whole experience in San Francisco. Was there a time, as you got into more of the artist thing, more of the worship industry thing, where, I guess for everybody who heads into that, was there ever a tug and struggle with comparison and all that stuff for you on your journey through all of that through the years? And how are you doing with all that right now? Because I know we all do, but I just wanted to see.
Oh, I mean, there's definitely comparison, and I would always say, I remember being at a conference, and it was a Bethel Music conference, and I'm like, well, got the afternoon set again, and I was just sitting there, and I felt the Holy Spirit say, oh, I must still really want to teach you something. And I sat with that and was like, I think I would rather just always learn. I would rather be in a position where I just always am ready to learn. When it comes to comparison, I think even with vocals, that's probably the easiest place to compare yourself to people. Yeah. And I'm like, I know that my worship leader, Joe, back in the day, he said, do you like your voice? And I remember saying, I think so. He's like, no, you have to know that you like it. You have to like it. And he was very intense about it. I'm like, okay, I have to like my voice. And it was this kind of growth towards, I like it when people like it, and I like it when people don't like it, and because it belongs to me. And I like it when it's at its best, and I like it when it's at its worst, and I like it, and that had been because it's attached to my heart. It's close to my heart. It's what God gave me. And that's definitely been probably the biggest struggle for me, would be to just like the sound that comes out of me. And
Yeah.
once I really started liking it and loving it,
Yeah.
then it came out more freely, because you want to share what you love.
Mm-hmm.
Naturally, you want to hide what you don't like, and you want to share what you love. And so I stopped comparing myself to other people, because God said specifically, He said, you are not just a worship leader, and you're not just a singer. Singers are a dime a dozen, and
Yeah.
worship leaders are at flooding the earth, Kristene, but you are a message.
Wow.
Everybody's first a message,
Yeah.
and what you are delivering, no one else can deliver. And so that has been good, because just like as a songwriter, you're like, everything's been said. How
I
many
know.
more songs about holiness can we possibly
Yeah.
sing? And I was with the Lord. Like, everything's been said, God. And He's like, true, but not the way you would say it.
Wow.
For songwriters too, it's like, we have to understand that
Mm.
the DNA that's in us is unique, just as unique as the way we would say things, just as
Wow, that's
unique
so
as the
good.
tone and quality of our vocal, and the message that's in us is not in anyone else.
Yeah.
And it will be too much for some, not enough for others, but it doesn't matter.
Gosh.
Hope that helps people out there.
No, it's huge. And it reminds me, it's like for you, like the tone of your voice and what God's saying through your soul in any moment, you're that same person who God's friend at 10, you know, license plate thing. Like no one else has had that intimate experience for him. And that can be heard when you sing. You can't compare it to anything else. So did any of that make its way, the idea of us being a message, did any of that make its way into this new project? Kind of where does God have you right now? That is kind of what this is coming out of. This project is about to be released in April.
Yeah. Um, this feels, I've listened back. I would always listen back to my masters whenever I would get them. And this is my 5th project. And one thing that was significant about every project up until this one, I would listen back to my masters, and I'd have this hint in the back of my mind: I don't believe myself. I would say, I don't believe myself. Not that what I wrote wasn't good, or what, you know, some of the stuff is pretty, I think is pretty awesome. Um, but this one is different for me.
Yeah.
And I think it's kind of the roughest vocally that I've ever felt. And have had some vocal struggles since 2020. But I listened back to the masters, and I said, I believe myself. I believe what I'm
Mm-hmm.
like. I believe that I believe what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And so the whole project, I think, is kind of this reckoning back to that 10-year-old that said, God, make me your friend. Please make me your
Mm.
friend. And it's being his friend is almost this invitation, and David's like, God, search me and know me and test me, try me, see if there's any wicked way within me. It's
Yeah.
this invitation to that type of closeness and intimacy. And so the project really, sometimes there was a few people that had heard it and were like, why is Kristene being so hard on herself? And I'm like, it's not. I need you to know, it's not me being hard on myself. It's what God showed me. It's like, I would describe it as a mirror. God saying, hey,
Mm-hmm.
like, you have stuff in your teeth, or hey, like, you're like, you probably should wash your hair now, or something like that.
Yeah.
Um, it's like that good friend that, if you had something in your teeth, they would tell you, or not those acquaintances that kind of pretend it's not there.
Man.
And it feels like the friendship of God.
Mm.
And the title of it's called The Field, and it's based on the parable of the guy who sells everything because he found treasure in a field, and then he goes and he sells all that he has to have this
Mm.
treasure, have this field. And The song, The Field, is basically, what do I have but Jesus? I found no one like him. All the world has loses its appeal when he stands beside me, and the world can keep its praises, its riches, and its treasures, because there's nothing like his presence. And men may give their favor, their fleeting awe and honor, but there's nothing like his presence.
Mm.
And it's so every song comes out of that type of a place of the I found a treasure in this field, and it wasn't this treasure of correctness or rightness and
Yeah.
or like somehow some validation. It's this treasure of friendship and cutting kindness that won't leave me to my own devices. Like, that is way more committed to me than I could
Mm.
ever be committed to him. And I think when I was 10, I thought, like, this is me being committed to Jesus. He has my life, you know. But in that moment, realizing how present he was, that he was completely, wholeheartedly committed that day, the day I was ever thought up, he was wholeheartedly committed, and that is the treasure that we find in
Mm.
the field, and that we would give everything for. It's just that friendship, that commitment.
Hmm.
So I feel very much that this is a really good picture of who I am, which makes it
Good.
maybe all the more raw and vulnerable.
Mm.
But I you have to leave everything out on the table, you know.
Yeah. And release date is April
8th.
April 8th. So everyone, get ready. If you're not following Kristene on Instagram or all the social channels, do that. She'll be keeping everybody updated with the timing of all that. So, well, hey, I want to thank you for your yes to this season with us as a ministry worship circle. I always tell people we don't know what we're doing, but God does, and we're open handed with it all. And it's crazy how you've ended up connected to us, Kristene, and just in getting to know you better and looking over your life, the message that you shared today of your life and God's presence with you through the journey is really what we want for everybody listening, to know that you're loved and you're not alone, and that he's been giving you hints and signs all along the journey that he's with you and he's there. So thank you. Would you pray us out, just, for everybody listening, who is a message? And I just appreciate that.
Yeah, of course. God, I pray for every worship leader, every leader listening, for every soul listening. Um, God, that you would defeat that thing of comparison once and for all, with just that idea and that promise that I have a message inside of me, and no one else can deliver it except me. And I pray for those who have felt stuck and just like that they can't hear your voice right now. I pray for the ability to hang on through the dark night of the soul. I pray for the
Mm.
ability to hang on through the fear, through the cloud. And because you're on the other side, you always are on the other side. Um, and you're with them through it all. It says, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for your rod and your staff, they comfort me. That you are so present even when we're at our worst, God. You're with us at our worst and with us at our best, and that's what friendship is. So I pray that the friendship of God would be felt for everyone who is struggling to find their message right now. The friendship of God would be felt for everyone who is struggling with comparison right now. And that they would trust that something beautiful is being built in them through everything. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.